You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast, coming to you from Montecito, California. And before I begin, I do want to remind you that there is a website associated with this podcast called wealthformula.com. And that is where you can get all sorts of resources. You can sign up for all sorts of lists. You can join the accredited investor club, the Wealth Formula Investor Club, which if you're interested in investing in some private stuff, join up, get onboarded. You do need to be an accredited investor. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you have to apply for something or something like that. You just either are or are not an accredited investor, sort of like being pregnant or not pregnant. It's a verification of that you make either $200,000 per year or $300,000 per year if you're filing jointly for at least 2 years with the reasonable expectation of continuing to do so, or you have a net worth of $1 million outside of your personal residence, which means if you live in California and you just happen to have a lot of equity in your house, well, that doesn't count. So if that sounds like you and you're interested in investing in some of the stuff that we look at in our group, make sure to go to Investor Club and sign up, and there will be an onboarding process there for you. With that being said, let's talk about a very interesting topic. And I got to tell you, sometimes, you might be wondering how to get people to interview and all that kind of stuff. Well, sometimes it's me going out there and finding people. And sometimes it is people finding me or, companies trying to hook up podcasters with good interviews. And this one was interesting because it hadn't occurred to me. Gosh, prenups, prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, this kind of stuff. This is seriously important when it comes to personal finance. I mean, getting married is an incredible commitment financially, and getting divorced is perhaps a bigger commitment financially, and probably the biggest effect you may have on your personal finances in the future. It's something that I've never talked about, and really, frankly, not something I knew very much about. No one getting married thinks they're ever going to get divorced. I can tell you that from personal experience. I've been divorced for a few years now, but yet over half of American marriages end up in divorce. And I have to tell you, I'm very, very lucky that I had an amicable breakup. And so is my ex-wife, by the way. Most of the divorces I've seen in the past few years have been quite ugly. My ex-wife and I get along just fine. And she's actually smart. She's very smart for having not gone the other way. And I know she doesn't really listen to our podcast, but, she had friends who were attorneys trying to push her into getting ugly, and she refused to do so. And that is a very smart thing. And I'll get to why that is in a second. But I'll tell you, I have two friends that I know, and actually fairly high profile people that you may even know because, they're in the investment space, but getting through divorces in the past few years. And in both situations, the men originally offered what they thought were very fair settlements that their wives just rejected. And in both cases, the divorces lasted for years, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, $1 million. And in both cases, the wives ended up, getting less than they had originally been offered by, the husband. So listen, it wasn't just the ex-wives who lost out in that situation, because no one wins in an ugly divorce, right? The kids suffer. There's a huge emotional and financial toll to pay for both sides. And the only winner is the divorce attorney, right? And that's what I was going to say. That's why I said my ex-wife was smart. She didn't want to do that, even though she had attorney friends who were trying to get her to be ugly. Anyway, knowing this, you've probably got stories. Everybody's got stories, ugly divorces. It should be enough to convince anyone to have a prenup in place before getting married, or even potentially getting a postnup in place after the fact. Now, gosh, that sounds even trickier because listen, I know it is not that easy. How do you even bring up a prenuptial agreement when, you're in love with somebody and, everything's all wonderful and planning a life together and you're going to live happily ever after. And then all of a sudden, you have to throw in the well, yeah, what if things don't work out? Then what? I mean, it's not very romantic. And I think that's that that's something that people just gonna have to figure out. I have to tell you, at least in my case, I'm not even close to that. I'm not even with anybody right now, so I don't have to worry about it. But it is an interesting, very, very interesting idea and I was actually kind of surprised myself that I hadn't even occurred to me to have this topic on a personal finance podcast. But that's what I'm doing. My guest on Wealth Formula Podcast today, he specializes in this area. He has a ton of experience at sort of the highest level of prenuptial complexity. So we say with celebrities, athletes, ultra high net worth individuals, whoever it is, though. I mean, the issues are kind of the same. There's emotional and there's financial. And he has great perspective on how to approach all of these sensitive issues. So whether you're married, divorced, or just curious, make sure to tune in to this interview. It's I found it really fascinating and interesting, and who knows, maybe I'll actually have to put it to work someday myself again. But you'll have that interview right after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast is Aaron Thomas. He's a family law attorney and the founder of Prenups.com. He is a 3-time winner of Atlanta's Best Divorce Attorney, a graduate of the Harvard Law School in 2002, and has been recognized as peers as one of the fastest growing family law firms in the state of Georgia. He's also, as I mentioned, the founder of Prenups.com. Aaron, welcome to Wealth Formula Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Buck. Glad to be here.
So, I was just commenting to you before we started about how it occurred to me that, wow, how did I not cover this topic on a personal finance show, right? Pretty remarkable. But maybe a little bit about you. How did you end up kind of specializing in the space? It sounds like you do a lot of work for some very high profile individuals in this space. How did this become your specialty?
Yeah. I kind of stumbled into family law. Divorce lawyer is not something a lot of kids say that's what I want to do when I grow up. But there was a family law firm in the area, like you said, representing some high profile individuals, and they needed an attorney with experience in the courtroom. I had it. And, the rest, as they say, was history. I started practicing family law and didn't really have a lot of experience myself. I hadn't been married at the time. My parents just celebrated 57 years of marriage together. So most of our friends hadn't been divorced. I didn't really know what it entailed. And I very quickly realized that marriage is probably the most important financial agreement, the most important financial contract that many people enter into in their entire lives. And no one's really read the fine print.
Yeah, I think the challenge with this, I'm actually divorced, and unfortunately, I didn't have a prenup. It was during surgical residency. I didn't have any money at the time. It didn't even occur to me. Fortunately, in my situation, it was like a very, very easy parting, and we just decided, how we were going to do it. It usually doesn't seem to work that way. Most of the people I know who've been divorced, it just gets so ugly, and so. One of the things that, that comes to mind to me now, if I'm to do it again, and I'm, not in any situation to even really, think about that right now necessarily, but if the time comes where I'm about to get married again or something like that, I think the thing that would be hard for me is to even figure out how do you even approach that topic without sounding like an asshole, right? I mean, that's
yes,
so you probably get that question a lot. I'm curious on what's your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, let's be clear. Prenups have not the greatest reputation in the world. You can't even talk about the topic without talking about how much stigma there is surrounding prenups. I thought the same thing, honestly, before I got into the area, that prenups are you're just planning for divorce. You're planning to split up before your relationship even really gets started. I think a better way to look at it is like a partnership agreement for your marriage. If you were going into a business partnership, of course, you're going to put down on paper, you're going to have some serious conversations about each person's rights and responsibilities and who owns what. And, of course, any partnership agreement that's worth the paper it's written on is going to have some kind of clause that talks about what happens if a partner leaves the business or walks away. But that's not the goal of the partnership agreement is for the breakup of it. And I think if all you're doing in your prenup is saying what happens in divorce, you're missing a real opportunity. A good, solid prenup should talk about each spouse's rights and responsibilities during the marriage itself. What is mine, what's yours, what's ours, and go a little bit further than just kind of planning for the potential end of the relationship.
And before we sort of dive into the nuts and bolts of this, like I'm curious on the strength of the prenuptial agreement in the first place, because locally I'm in Montecito here, and it's a high profile divorce happening with Kevin Costner, and they had a prenup in place, and I'm sure he had fine attorneys put that together. And sounds like he's kind of getting sued, and his ex is going retrade. And can you comment on that? I mean, when you hear about something like that, you wonder if they can just do that, then what's the point of doing this in the first place?
Yeah, no, great question. Prenups, that is a common misconception, is that they're not really enforceable, that you can just kind of go and relitigate the whole issue. Kevin Costner's situation, I've been following it pretty closely, as you might imagine. And in his situation, so a prenup can only cover division of assets and debts and alimony. It cannot cover child custody and child support. So in his situation, he's actually got a rock solid enforceable prenup. I think what got all hit the news about the litigation was that his wife was going for, a very large amount of child support. I think the final figure was something like 75 grand a month. But that's primarily because his net worth was apparently 400 million. And the prenup that they signed said that his wife only got 1 million, regardless of whether they were married for 1 year or for 20 years. And so, at the end of a long marriage, kind of the only avenue that was left for her, because the prenup was so solid, was to go after as much child support as she could get to kind of maintain her standard of living.
So her thing was for just a million total, or a million per year?
She got $1 million total under the terms of the prenup.
Oh my God, with a 400 million.
So you can see why child support was litigated so heavily.
I guarantee you he wasn't poor when he got married either. That's
she was there for a big increase in his net worth.
Well, I mean, and again, I think when you look at a situation like that, I mean, again, these are local people, and they're like, I'm sure his wife was not there for the money, and she never thought it would get to that point. And so she thought of it as a technicality. And well, gosh, then the next thing you know, nobody thinks they're getting divorced. And then half of the people in the country are getting divorced, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
Right.
So let's dive into this a little bit more. Do you say that a well-written prenup can help you and your spouse reduce arguments during your marriage as well, not only in divorce? Why is that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of trying to address as many of the money issues that are going to crop up over the course of your marriage at the beginning of your marriage. During my legal career, I probably participated in about 1,000 divorce cases. And what I saw during that time is the same kinds of issues would come up over and over. Arguments about spending, arguments over access to money. One spouse having a high income and living essentially in a different socioeconomic bracket than their spouse who doesn't have access to income. And so what I realized is a lot of the money arguments that would come up in a divorce case weren't things that just cropped up during the divorce. They were arguments that have been taking place in these marriages from the moment that these couples got married. And so, people would come to my office and say, what do you mean she gets half of my retirement? What do you mean he gets half of the house that I paid for over the course of the marriage? And that to me showed that there was a lack of alignment in terms of, how did they structure their finances? Did all of their money go into one bank account and they both have access to that money equally? Or do they kind of keep separate accounts? Who pays for what? And so addressing a lot of those questions on the front end in your prenup is, I think, an underrated way to try to address financial issues that could crop up in your marriage.
What's the one paycheck rule?
Yeah. The one paycheck rule is, a lot of people kind of have the general sense that what I bring into the marriage, I keep, no matter what happens. And whatever we build together, that's our marital property that we split. But it's not that simple. The one paycheck rule is the rule that says once you get married, that first paycheck that you get, you may take some of that paycheck, you put a little bit of it in your checking, a little bit in your savings, a little bit goes in your 401k. You may pay down your mortgage and your car note, put some of that into a brokerage account. Every single thing that first paycheck touches is now a commingled asset. A portion of it is considered your separate property. A portion of it is considered your marital property. So someone who says, but I had that piece of real estate before I got married. Yes, you did.
Yeah,
but
but
as soon as money you earned during the marriage touches it, it is now a portion marital, a portion separate property. And if there ever comes a time where you've got to split that up, it's a whole mess. And, you're talking about hiring forensic accountants to separate out what's what.
Oh, what a mess. Okay. In theory, how would you prevent that kind of commingling? I mean, you just separate accounts. It sounds pretty messy.
Well, what most people do, and what any decent prenup is going to do, is kind of split things up into, I call them these three buckets, your money buckets. You got mine, you got yours, and you got ours. And a lot of people will do what I call a title-based prenup. So if something is in my name, it belongs to me. If something's in your name, it belongs to you. And if we put in everything we put in joint names belongs to the two of us. And what that does is it eliminates this accidental commingling of assets that happens for most couples who don't have prenups. And you're able to say, okay, this house that I, owned prior to the marriage, I'm going to pay for those expenses with just my paycheck, and it will remain 100% mine. And your retirement that you had before you met me, you're going to fund that with your paycheck, and that will remain 100% yours. And then things that you put in joint names, our marital home, our joint bank account, maybe some other assets, or maybe a rental property that you buy as a joint project together. Those will comprise the marital estate, but you don't have this kind of mess of everything has a marital component and everything has a separate component, and nobody really knows where they stand at any given time.
Yeah, interesting. So when you talk about sort of, once you get married, you have the combined, I don't know how you describe that. Essentially, your estate is both of yours, not just an individual's at that point. So is a prenup something that can potentially define that better? I mean, part of the issue is, I think, the reality is that, I look around and other guys who are in my situation, right? Generally who are high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals who are, maybe they'll get married again. And usually the person that a lot of the times is these people that I know who are dating are substantially less. It's not an equal partnership on the finance side. We're talking about, somebody worth being 50 million and the other person literally, kind of just being a six-figure or less person. So in those situations, I mean, it sounds great to have these nice partnerships and define whose is what, but in reality, the financials can be so asymmetric. And in those situations, how do you even start?
Yeah, I think in those situations, it is all that much more important to define how much of the high earners' money is going to go into this kind of joint bucket, into the hours bucket. So there's no confusion. Where disaster strikes is when the high earner says, well, I built this empire. These are my finances. All of this belongs to me. And the lower earner says, I thought that this was 50-50. And so what a lot of couples will do where there's such vast disparity of wealth is kind of define a percentage or an amount of the high earner's income that is going to go into the joint account. Couples like that use what I call the outside in plan for funding their joint account, where each spouse's income goes into their separate bank accounts, but then they both contribute to a joint bank account that pays for their joint expenses. Usually those contributions are going to be proportionate to their income. So if I make 90% of our joint money, I am going to pay for 90% of our joint expenses by, for every $1,000 that you put in the joint account, I'm going to put $9,000 in the joint account. And that way, each spouse is contributing, proportionally. They each kind of have a dog in the fight. They've got their dollars in according to what they can earn. And then those couples will keep, some of their money outside of the joint accounts, some of it inside the joint accounts. So if it ever comes time to split, there is going to be a transfer of money from the high earner to the low earner, but the high earner or the high net worth individual isn't putting every single dollar they have on the line into that joint accounts. And the low earner is still getting the benefit of being married to someone who is a high net worth individual. So,
sure. The word income keeps coming in, but obviously for a lot of ultra high net worth individuals, that's a sort of poorly defined thing, right? A lot of it is you're kind of lumping it all in, right, with investment income and that kind of thing as well, I assume. A lot of strategy in the ultra high net worth space includes trusts. I can say in my case, and this actually started without any thought about marriage or prenups or anything at all, but at some point started a dynasty trust. And I have essentially most of my wealth outside of my estate already, and it belongs to my kids and in their trust through beneficiaries of my trust. So in situations like that, is the money in those types of trusts still fair game in a divorce?
That is a very good question because that is
I know a
one
lot
of the
of
reasons
people
why they're
listening to this. A lot of people
right.
listening to this.
I'll give you the lawyer answer is it depends, right?
Right.
There are, if you get in front of a judge who believes that trust and the assets within it are part of the marital estate, then everything is fair game. Certainly, almost every judge is going to at least allow discovery into those assets, meaning turning over the financial records of those assets to see what's in there, because those things can be considered at a minimum when dividing up what is outside of the trust. And obviously, there is a huge financial incentive for the other spouse and that spouse's attorneys to try to kind of pierce into that trust and get the largest settlement possible for their clients. So, again, to me, just another reason to try to define, what is part of the marital estate and make sure everybody's on the same page there.
Yeah. And actually, the flip side of it is I was thinking in some ways that's a good way for a high net worth person to bring up the concept of the prenup in the first place, because honestly, the reality is, if there's a divorce, you're not going to probably get very much from me because I don't have anything. I don't own anything. So let's talk about this and be transparent about this up front. So, that's kind of what my take on it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, someone who is marrying a high net worth individual needs a very good lawyer negotiating on their side of the prenuptial agreement as well to make sure that, they're not left completely high and dry should the relationship come to an end. So, protection can be had on both sides of this. I mean, a good agreement is going to protect both parties and their interests and, not have unintended consequences for either side.
Okay. What's a postnuptial agreement and why would you need one of those? I mean, beyond the fact that, I guess is postnuptial basically just doing a prenup after the fact? That's all postnuptial is?
Pretty much, yeah. Postnup is a prenup that happens after the couple's already married. A few different reasons that couples will enter into them. First is they're kind of like the prenup too late. Somebody started the process too late. They don't finish it before the wedding date, and they sign a postnup shortly after. There are some couples where there's been some event that has happened, whether it's infidelity or the birth of a child even, or, one spouse moves for the other spouse's job and no longer is able to work. And the couple wants to address that specific situation and write it into a postnuptial agreement. And then there are a lot of people that come for a postnuptial agreement who they realize they've been married a certain period of time and they, for example, have been living as though they kind of have separate financial lives. I'm saving for retirement. You are, investing in, riskier asset classes than I'm willing to invest in. And we've kind of, are living these separate financial lives. And we just want to codify that so that, we don't, get in front of a judge one day and they lump everything that we have together. Sometimes people will do it for debt protection, or one spouse owns a business and wants to kind of, separate and make sure that that's outside of the marital estate. So, there's a number of reasons why people will go into postnuptial agreements.
What I found is my friends who've had divorces, like bad divorces without prenups, those things end up in a situation where uniformly, in my opinion, if they had just settled up front reasonably, the husband and the wife would have come out better. And neither of them ends up coming out better. And the attorneys, I mean, no offense, but the attorneys really come out the big winners in those situations. I've talked to at least two or three guys who are pretty high net worth in this situation who felt like they gave some pretty reasonable, settlement options early on. And then they were like, well, she didn't want it though. And then when it all said and done, the woman that they were married to got less than they were offered in the first place. And then again, the guy loses out more, lost out more in those situations too, because he ended up paying a ton of money for the divorce. Right. I mean, so that's one of the things that I think people got to understand. It's both sides stand to lose here if there's not something in place.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is such an overlooked piece of this whole equation. It is not unusual at all for married couples to spend 20 to 25% of their net worth on lawyers and accountants and litigation, and then end up, to fight over who gets the other 75 or 80%. And like you said, no offense taken, the only people that win out here are the lawyers who their financial incentives are not aligned with their clients in a divorce. The divorce system is not set up to help, divorcing couples reach a very quick and inexpensive settlement. If you think that you can get 60% of the assets, the more that there is, the more that the lawyers, can potentially make by how long the litigation plays out. So, the expense of the divorce case itself is a huge factor. If the stigma didn't exist and many couples just said, hey, here's what we consider to be the marital estate, and if anything ever happens, we're going to split these assets 50-50, and we're both going to go on our own ways, that would keep billions of dollars every year in the pockets of these divorcing couples and out of the pockets of the divorce lawyers who are litigating their cases.
It's incredible. I've been asking you questions from the perspective of ultra high net worth or high net worth individuals, but it's not just the rich that could potentially benefit, right? I mean, you don't necessarily need to be rich to benefit from a prenup.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. I think that is one of, the most pernicious misconceptions about prenups is that they're only for the ultra wealthy. The average kind of middle class or upper middle class couple that has, anywhere from, even as low as 100 grand net worth to 250 grand to 500 grand net worth, they really can't afford lawyers billing by the hour for the course of a year, which is how long the average contested divorce case takes. They don't have liquid of, tens of thousands of dollars to spit out every month or every few months to pay lawyers' fees. And those are some of the couples who could use a prenup more than anyone else. If you're a multi-millionaire, you can at least afford to pay your lawyers no matter how long the litigation goes. If you are, making 100, 120 grand a year, those lawyer fees are going to add up really, really quickly. And the loss of all that money is going to have a huge impact on your standard of living after the case is over. And so it really is, I think a lot of people also miss out on the fact that what makes a divorce case messy and expensive is not how much you have coming in. There are many, many couples who they get married in their late 20s and they have very minimal assets at that time. But by the time they go through a divorce, 10, 15 years later, they've amassed some serious wealth. And the argument over how to treat those assets is what causes cases to spiral out of control in terms of the cost. And so it really benefits couples who may have a high net worth trajectory in front of them. They're Henrys or high earners, not rich yet. Those are the couples who may benefit the most from getting a prenup because they're going to amass assets between the time they get married and the potential demise of their marriage, and protecting against that money going to, legal fees and staying in their pocket is a huge benefit of getting a prenup.
And what are any special considerations on the lower earning spouse? What specific considerations should a lower earning spouse address when considering, a prenup or a postnup then?
Yeah. A good example may be Kevin Costner's, divorce that you mentioned earlier. their prenup basically said that she got, $1 million no matter how long the relationship lasted. And something better for her to have negotiated for on the front end would have been a percentage of all of the assets. That way, maybe she's not going to, no one would probably say it would be fair for her to get 50% of all the assets that, Kevin Costner built up over his long career. But if it were a percentage, then the more that Kevin's career grew over the years, the more that she would have gotten, and the more she would have had the ability to maintain kind of a similar standard of living in her household that the kids are used to having in her husband's household. And so the other things to consider are, what kinds of sacrifices is she going to make? This is Kevin Costner's wife. Obviously, could be, either spouse. If we're talking about the lower earning spouse, what kind of sacrifices are you going to make by virtue of being married to this high net worth individual? You may forego kind of a working career altogether. You may move for the other person's job. You may be expected to play more of a homemaker role. And if you've been out of the workforce for 20 years with no prospects of working, you want to make sure that you are going to be compensated well enough that if the relationship comes to an end, that you are not going to be left holding the bag, and that your financial interests are protected, both in the event of a divorce, but also during the marriage. So you can negotiate how much access you have to funds during the relationship itself. One thing I've learned from my career is two people living in the same household, but in completely different socioeconomic brackets, is a recipe for argument and resentment. So, negotiating how much of the income that either spouse has is going to end up in that joint bucket that is, accessible by both spouses.
Tell us about prenups.com. Who's it for? I mean, I'm wondering if this is, that probably depends on sort of the complexity of wealth and all that kind of stuff, right? If whether or not you can just simply do this online.
Yes. So prenups.com, we are a firm of lawyers. So we have lawyers in states all across the country. So you'll be working with someone who's experienced in family law, who knows what they're doing and can customize an agreement that fits your situation. Most of the clients of prenups.com fall into kind of that younger category, the Henrys, the people who are on an upward trajectory, have not built huge assets yet. And for those, prenups.com offers flat fee prenups for $3,500. And then for your businessmen, your people who are real estate investors, athletes, the entertainers, the other high net worth individuals, there's kind of the platinum package where we're going to work with your financial advisors and your estate planning attorneys and the rest of your team to really customize an agreement. And those are kind of on a per case basis, depending on the complexity of the case, up to and including getting attorneys to protect your assets that may be outside the United States, and making sure that the protection extends internationally as well.
Is this something that is state specific? So if somebody lives in California, they would want a California attorney to be dealing with? Is it something that you can do more broadly?
It is state specific, which is why we've been bringing on attorneys in each state where we practice. Yes, because it is all 50 states have their own bar membership, and that's who needs to draft your agreement.
Yeah. Anyway, fascinating stuff. Aaron Thomas from prenups.com. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us here on Wealth Formula Podcast today.
It's been an honor to be here. Thanks, Buck.
I'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you never have to deal with such issues as divorce, but they are, in fact, a reality in life. So if you are on the precipice of getting married, make sure you consider this whole prenuptial thing. And if you are married, postnup sounds like a pretty good idea to me. But do me a favor, don't tell whoever it is in your life that Buck Joffrey suggested that you do it, because I don't want to be the bad guy. Okay, well, maybe you should tell him I am the one. Maybe I am. Throw me under the bus. I'll take it for you. I'll jump on the grenade for you. Anyway, that's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing out.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.